Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Music for a Book podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Britt.
And I'm Hannah.
And every 2 weeks, we read and review a book, assign a song to that book, draw the parallels between the two, and have some fun along the way. So welcome back to Season 2, Episode 4 of the Music for a Book podcast.
And I'm super excited for this book to talk about it. So this episode, we are talking about One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. And this is the first book in the Shepherd King Duology, which is pretty cool for a fantasy after reading Throne of Glass, which is, 8 books?
8 books.
To just read like a nice little two fantasy book series.
It starts and ends. So excited.
Yep. We haven't read the second one yet, though. We just finished the first one.
But I am excited to read the second one now that we've read the first one. So excited for that. But if you guys are new here, how this episode is going to work is we're going to go over some trigger warnings and a brief synopsis of the book, and then we're going to reveal our song choices, which is, in my opinion, one of the best parts. And after we reveal our song choices, we're going to move into what we like to call spoiler territory. So after that point, anything and everything that happens in the book, we will discuss cover to cover. So if you haven't read the book, you want to avoid spoilers, that would be your time to back out and come back once you have, which we don't talk much, but I just want to let you know that you probably should read this one. This was it's pretty solid. I enjoy it a lot. So that's your time to back out and come back later.
Definitely. Yeah, because I feel like, too, this is like a fantasy book, but it's more like magical than necessarily like fantasy. So it's not, like werewolves and vampires and fae and witches. I don't know. It was cool.
And it's much less intimidating, and the magic system is so freaking cool. We can't wait to talk to you guys about the magic system that's within this. But yeah, we're excited to dive on into this.
Yes.
Dear reader, just to go over some trigger warnings for the book. We did get these from Storygraph, but as always, check your triggers. Just be mindful if there are certain things that you need to avoid. In One Dark Window, you can expect violence, blood, there's injuries in detail. There's a little bit of sexual content. It's honestly not a whole heck of a lot. Death of a parent, death of children is a big theme, and it is set in medieval times. So just that kind of general vibe that we have going on there.
So, quick synopsis, back cover: maiden, monster, martyr. Elspeth Spindle needs more than just luck to stay safe in the eerie, mislocked kingdom of Blunder. She needs a monster. She calls him the Nightmare, an ancient mercurial spirit trapped in her head. He protected her. He keeps her secrets. But nothing comes for free, especially magic. When Elspeth meets a mysterious highwayman on the forest road, her life takes a drastic turn. Thrust into a world of shadow and deception, she joins a dangerous quest to cure Blunder of the dark magic infecting it. Except the highwayman just so happens to be the king's own nephew, captain of the most dangerous men in Blunder, and guilty of high treason.
Ooh.
Dun dun dun.
I feel like that is my favorite type of description because it gives away very, very little.
Oh, yeah.
Finally. If y'all have been around, we cannot stand when covers ruin books. Like the back cover, absolutely not.
Yeah, as you know from previous episodes, we love our girl Abby Jimenez, but if I would have read the back of Yours Truly before, I don't think I would have loved it as much as I did.
Completely agree. But yeah, so let's dive into this one. We have to go over our song choices.
I'm excited.
Love this. So for One Dark Window, I opted out of Taylor Swift. However, I did almost pick a Taylor Swift song, but we're making progress here, people. Okay. So the song that I have chosen, I feel like is, again, I feel like I've gone a little on the nose with some of these song choices, but I kind of love it. So the song that I picked is actually Demons by Imagine Dragons.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah. It's when you hear the lyrics, because I was sifting. When I heard the lyrics, I was like, there's no way I can't do this one.
Yeah. That's how I feel about mine too.
Yeah.
So mine is one of my favorite artists, top 5 artists for sure. I picked Control by Halsey.
Ooh. Excited to hear about that one.
It's a good one. The vibe of the song is very, the lyrics, but also
the
song
mood.
itself is a good, yeah. I was debating between like 2 Halsey songs, actually.
But yeah, those are our song choices. We will talk more about that later. But for now, we are entering spoiler territory.
Yes. Spoiler zone. And I'm going to say right now, I might even spoil some of Fourth Wing and Iron Flame for you. Just a couple things I want to like tie in. So if you don't want those spoiled either, just FYI. Just a warning to you out there. But yeah, definitely spoiler zone right away.
Yep. So back out now. Come back when you've read the book. We would love to have you. If not, if you've read it, or if you're just here for the vibes, welcome on in. Let's dive into One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig.
So I think before we dive into the book, we should talk about the magic system a little bit, because it is a little bit different, and I feel like it's the heart of the book, right? It's really kind of the cards and the magic system.
Yeah, and I've never really read anything quite like this that wasn't like a specific like witchy type of book. You know what I mean? I think that it's a super interesting magic system. So we'll go over a little bit more about that.
In this magic system, there's the Providence cards, which that's how like normal people basically get their magic. So they like have these cards, like these little playing cards basically, and there's 12 of them. So with these Providence cards, there's a limited number in circulation. It's not like you can just make them, or there's like a couple of them, there's only a few. So some of them are very rare. So there's the Black Horse, which the magic granted with that one is Master of Combat. There's the Golden Egg, which brings great wealth. The Prophet, which is glimpses of the future. And all of these also have like a negative effect too, like a consequence of overuse. The White Eagle brings courage. The Maiden, which is an important one, brings great beauty. But the negative effect is it makes the person cold. It chills their heart. And then there's the Chalice, which I think is one of the craziest ones.
I agree.
But it turns liquid into truth serum. But then if it's overused, it would turn this serum into poison, which is pretty interesting. And then there's the Well, brings clear sight to recognize one's enemies. And then there's the Iron Gate, which brings blissful serenity no matter the struggle. The Scythe, which is the power to control others, but when overused, it brings physical pain. The Mirror, which grants invisibility, but the overuse of that, it like lifts the veil between both worlds. So if we use it too long, you can see ghosts, which is interesting. And then one of the most important cards is the Nightmare, and it allows the user to speak into the mind of others, but also the consequence would reveal one's deepest fears. The most rare card, the only one in existence, is the Twin Alders. So this brings the power to commune with the Blunder's ancient entity, which is the Spirit of the Wood, which we'll talk about here shortly. But nobody knows kind of what's the consequence of using that one.
Yep. Those cards definitely come into play significantly through the story, but it's also important to know kind of how they came about, because that is the foundation of how the plot moves forward. So in Blunder, there is this book called the Old Book of Elders, and that holds all of the rules and laws of magic that used to run free, but now it's actually used as a method of control by the royal family of Blunder. And so basically, magic used to be provided to the people by the Spirit of the Wood, or the Spirit, we'll call it, by you enter her forest and you make her offerings, and she in turn would gift you magic. So all forms of magic not taken through the cards are now outlawed in Blunder. And so any sort of gifts that are experienced from within a person are illegal and punishable by death. The only usable magic is within these Providence cards. These Providence cards were originally created by the Spirit of the Wood and the Shepherd King. The Shepherd King was gifted this incredible magic by the Spirit of the Wood, but if there's one theme that you need to keep kind of front of mind as we go through this book, is that magic comes at a terrible cost, and there is always a cost for the things that are done. The Shepherd King wanted to share his gift of magic with others, which is why the cards were originally created. However, the Shepherd King had to give up something of himself in order to have each of these cards created. The consequence to that naturally was, because these cards were created and they went into circulation, the people of Blunder never had to return to the wood to meet the spirit and provide her offerings. So bitch got petty and vengeful real quick. she said, no, we will not be doing this. So the spirit decided, actually, let's see how much you don't need me anymore. She created something called the mist, which lured people into the forest. So when afflicted with the mist, so they would walk in, and the longer you're in the mist, the worse it becomes for you. You either go mad and basically die or lose your mind, or if they're children, they get like an infection, basically, and their veins would grow dark. They would have an unruly magic that's inside of them. The magic of the children is kind of unknown in terms of how exactly it works, but it is illegal to harbor someone that you know has been exposed to this fever and has magic. The magic also degenerates these children over time, which leads to very few of them actually making it into adulthood. One, because it's illegal, and two, because something usually happens to their body in a really terrible way.
Yeah, especially if they don't know their magic and how, like, what price is being paid for them using it.
Yes.
It can really kind of speed up that degeneration.
Exactly. And it's different for everyone because they're seeking these children out that are ill and like hunting them, basically. They're either holding them captive or unfortunately they are killing them. There's not a lot of research about what happens to these children. And so they're looking to destroy the mist and kind of restore the magical balance that's within Blunder. And so in the Book of Elders, the Shepherd King said, you have to unite all 12 of the Providence cards in order to free magic within Blunder. And again, nothing is free. So that kind of starts the journey of the royal family. It really is kind of the royal family against the spirit of the wood. Magic used to be a beautiful thing, and now it's become a way to control people by fear and all of that lovely fun stuff.
Before we jump totally into the plot, just a little bit about the characters too, which I thought was kind of interesting, is like all these families are based on trees. In the book too, it's funny because like instead of like, oh my gosh, or like, geez, like they use trees as like like trees. And I just think that's like a funny little,
instead of like, oh gods. Oh
yeah.
gods.
It's just trees.
Yep.
But we have the Spindle family, which is our main character, Elspeth, and her mother has passed away, Iris. Her father, Eric, and he's remarried to Miriam, and they have twins, Demia and Naya. Elspeth mostly lives with the Hawthorne family growing up, so with her aunt and uncle, Opal and Tyron, and her cousin Ione, and then they have two other cousins too, Lynn and Aldridge. And then we have the royal family, or the Rowan kings, King Rowan, and then his two sons, Hoth and Elm. They're cousins of the Yew family. So the Yew family is going to be Raven. It's kind of our main character from that family. His sister Jesper, and then his brother Emery, and parents Morat and Finir. Then we have a lot of side characters too. The funny thing to me about this is like everybody has like very unique names, right? So there's like Orith, Philic, Hoth, Elm, Elspeth, Jesper. Then we have John.
Literally. Just John. And also Eric. Just John and Eric. And we have like Wick and Gerda, Maylene.
Yeah. There's a lot of characters, but really Elspeth is your girl. That's who you gotta pay attention to. Which is funny because I never heard the name Elspeth until Saltburn. And the mom's name in Saltburn is Elspeth. And when I picked up this, I was like, oh my gosh, what are the chances? All right, we ready?
We're ready. So I know that was a lot of information. It is a lot of information. It's jam-packed into a shorter kind of fantasy book, but you know, we gotta keep these people straight. So the book starts out with a kind of flashback to Elspeth. She talks about how when she was 9, it was the first time that the physicians came to her house. And something else too that I want to point out is that at the beginning of every chapter, there's a picture of a card. And I imagined these to be like a beautified version of a tarot card, like really like ornate and detailed. Every card has its own assigned color and like its own color aura to it. At the beginning of each chapter, the card has a little bit of information. And we've seen some other books do that too, where you get like little bits of information at the beginning of each chapter. And I quite liked them because most of them were just kind of like these magical like riddles or words or rhymes that you could hear through like the Book of Elders and stuff like that. Basically, we learn that from an early age, Elspeth was infected and she should have been turned in by her parents, but instead of turning her in, they actually had her go live with her cousins, the Hawthorns. Her mother did pass away, but her father was like, you're going to go live with the Hawthorns because they live very much off the grid. Like they're in the middle of the woods, basically. It's going to be very hard for you to be found out over there because, like we said, they very much either kill these people that have magic. Sometimes they're utilized for the royals' own biddings or, whatever they need, kind of hold them hostage, but it depends on the magic. And so we find out that she didn't think that she actually had magic available to her until one day her uncle has one of the Providence cards. So her uncle actually owns one of the Nightmare cards. The Nightmare card only has 2 in rotation. She wasn't sure. She thought maybe the fever, she had evaded some sort of magic somehow because nothing really came through for her until she touched the Nightmare card, and all of a sudden, a voice appears in her head.
Yes, and we refer to him as the Nightmare.
And like when Hannah was talking about the cards too, Nightmare is used to look into people's minds. She's literally stuck with the Nightmare. She is stuck with a beast who is rooted and living in her mind.
So we fast forward. So after, she has the Nightmare with her, and she's about 9 years old when this happens. So 11 years later, which is the time frame that the most of the book takes place, it starts out, she goes to her dad's house, has dinner with them, but then ends up leaving. Like she just doesn't want to deal with it, can't deal with it. And on her way home, she's attacked by highwaymen. And these highwaymen are like looking for cards. She's able to kind of channel the Nightmare to help her escape them and get away and just kind of fight them off, which that's where we kind of see like, okay, maybe the Nightmare has more control over her than just in her mind, that he can like help her fight you.
Yeah. And she had like superhuman strength. Like it was beyond the capabilities that even with someone like controlling her and helping her, like she got strength from him. But as we know, everything comes with a cost.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see the more that Elspeth reaches in and asks the Nightmare for help, the less control she's given back of her own mind as time kind of goes on. Something with the Nightmare too is that because he communicates with her in her head, we see a lot of this through like the italics print. He oftentimes speaks in these fucking riddles that she's like, what are you talking about? I don't understand the things that you're saying to me. So like, for example, we find out because they're going to Equinox, they were invited to the Equinox gathering at the castle with the royals. They're going because her uncle has a Nightmare card that he said that he pocketed from a highwayman years ago. No one knew, except obviously Elspeth, because she absorbed the Nightmare quite literally. There was one thing, they're talking about how the cards can't be destroyed because they're woven with old magic, and they're talking about how the Book of Elders and things like that, but Nightmare is kind of like clicking in her head. And he says, a heart of gold can still turn to rot. What he wrote, what he did, was all for naught. His cards are but weapons, his kingdom now cruel, shepherd of folly, king of the fools. And looking back on this, I realized what a foreshadow that was to truly who the Nightmare is and the reason that he lives within the realm of this Nightmare card.
That's a good point. So the night before Equinox, Elspeth says that she hasn't dreamed since touching the Nightmare card. She says like the Nightmare didn't disturb her wakeless hours. Like that was kind of where they were separate. He let her sleep. But she did like run into like a place, like a moment that the Nightmare like did not intend to show her. It's just interesting because it's like a man in his armor, and she stood in like her uncle's library, but the man in his armor disappeared and his place was like a creature. and like hunched over the desk and just kind of like pointed at her. She just kind of watched it and she just didn't know kind of what was going on. So she asked like, who was that man wearing the armor? And the creature just kind of said, somebody long dead, I'm afraid. She's still like, well, he had yellow eyes. And the nightmare just like clicks his tongue. Like the whole time I was just going, like thinking that's what like the nightmare was doing. And the nightmare just asked, would you like to hear the story? The library kind of just eclipsed into darkness. And so he tells the story. There was once a girl, clever and good, who tarried in the shadow in the depths of the wood. There was also a king, a shepherd by his crook, who reigned over magic and wrote the old book. The two were together, so the two were the same. The girl, the king, and the monster they became. And that was like her little vision with the nightmare.
Yeah, it's interesting looking back on that because I'm like, how did she not figure it out?
Yeah.
He literally gave her everything.
Right?
He was like,
I didn't figure it out.
I didn't either. Like, not until I like started to piece it together like a little bit further along, but I was like, Girlie had all of the knowledge up in there. She just did not connect those dots yet. But we end up moving into Equinox when they're at the castle. They're talking about what they're going to do with this nightmare card. We find out that Uncle Tyrn has a plan to like basically take care of his family forever, pay off any and all debts that he may have. So we find out that he's going to use the card to use an exchange for King Rowan's son Hoth and to take Ione's hand in like a courtship or like a work toward marriage, whatever they did in medieval times. Y'all know what's up.
Basically like a dowry.
Yeah. Essentially, like, I'm going to bring you 17 goats that I climb up to mountain for Madame Zeroni. And your great-great-great-grandfather, carried the goat up the mountain for her. Elspeth got into a fight with Ione about this because she's like, this family is not a good one. Like, he's a brute. They're ruthless. They're brutal. Like, you do not want to be part of that. And Ione's like, is it so wrong to be a dreamer, Elspeth? Is it so wrong for me to want these things? And she's like, no, but like not with him. Not with him.
Right.
Yeah, it's all bad. All bad when it comes to that.
And so with this courtship too, Ione is gifted a maiden card. So, I mean, I feel like that's fit for a princess, right?
Totally. Yeah, super cold-hearted and just changes her looks to be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Like I said, these cards have their own like colors and auras too. One thing that we find out with her abilities is Elspeth, not herself, but the nightmare can actually see the Providence cards based on the color that they have around them. Before she finds out Ione has the card, she sees that she has it because she can see the pink glow that's being cast off of the maiden card. And she knows that Ione's fucked, basically.
Yeah. Later at Equinox, Elspeth runs into Emery Yu. And Emery asks her, like, to what family do you belong? She replies, Spindle, and he's like, Elspeth Spindle. Quite a mouthful. And so Emery and Elspeth are, like, meeting, and somebody appears at Emery's side. Of course, we just said, right, Elspeth can see the color, the aura of the cards. And so she sees the blood red beam of the Scythe card. She said she didn't need to look who it was, that there was only 4 Scythe cards in Blunder. Only the Rowan family had them. So it was Prince Renel, but we call him Elm. He's the second heir to the throne. So he is the younger brother. And he's on the other side of Emery. And they're just kind of talking. They're cousins. Elspeth just, is not like feeling the greatest. And she just is like, I don't feel that great. And Emery kind of asks her, like, are you unwell? And she's like, no, I just need some air. And Emery, the ever gentleman he is, was like, all right, let's go. And so they just kind of go back and forth. Like, Elspeth is definitely like feeling a little pale. And Emery's like, well, I can take you. And she's like, no, I can find my own way. And he like hissed her like last name. His hand like closed around her arm. And she just kind of like backed away. She's like, what is going on? She's like, is he going to kill me? Like, what's happening right now? Like, what is going on at Equinox, right? And the nightmare in her head is like, not kill, merely maim, break. She like replies back to the nightmare in her head, like, what is he doing? Emery was just kind of staring at her like, there's something odd about you, Spindle. He's still like looking at her like, I see you, Elspeth Spindle. I see a pretty maiden with long black hair and charcoal eyes. I see a yellow gaze narrowed by hate. I see darkness and shadow. He like continues and says, I see your fingers long and pale, covered in blood. And Elspeth just kind of freezes and is like, what is going on? She just like slaps him, and just somebody kind of comes in and saves the day and kind of breaks Emery away from her. It's our boy Raven. And he just, is like, I'm so sorry. Just said, like, Emery's been drinking. I came to just make sure all is well. And Elspeth is just like silent, just kind of observing. And she's like, I know who he is. He's Raven New. And her father was a captain of the Destriers, and Raven took over right after Eric. So he's the new captain of Destriers. And so Raven walks her to her room and introduces himself and is like, oh, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Raven New. She says, like, the sound of his name made her stomach tighten. He just kind of walks away and she goes to bed and just like casting away thoughts of just her interaction with Emery and Raven, because I feel like that's just like a weird thing, right? Like what Emery told her, his ill manners.
Yeah.
And then his brother like coming to save the day, like out of nowhere. So just a little interesting moment at Equinox.
So once Elspeth finds out that Ione was gifted a maiden card, she kind of like freaks the fuck out because she loves her cousin so dearly, and the last thing she wants is for her heart to be steeled over and for her to turn cold and just unwieldy and just not herself, and especially in the company of someone like Hoth and the Rowan family. As she's talking to her aunt, and she ends up stepping away, and she gets pulled aside again by Raven, who is again the captain, and she notices that he actually has a nightmare card on his person. So he has the second nightmare card. When she finds out, they talk for a minute, and she notices that the dagger that's in Raven's hilt is the same dagger used by the highwaymen that attacked her on the road that night. And she realized that the captain of the Destriers is committing treason by trying to steal all of the cards and collect all 12 for themselves so they can help cure his brother, because Emery is deeply infected and degenerating fast. Elspeth thinks he's going to arrest her, but then I think back to what the nightmare said was like, they're the ones also committing a crime. They're not going to turn you in because you could turn them in. It's a mutually beneficial, terrible situation. She ends up running away from Raven because she's like, I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. And he chases after her. As she's running, all of a sudden, another voice kind of like booms in her head and is like, I'm not going to hurt you. Like, wait. He grabs her, whisks her aside, and she's like, how the fuck were you in my head? Like, why were you in my head just now?
And of course, Elspeth is like, used a nightmare card on me. Like, get out of my head. Like, don't do that again.
Yeah.
Because she's like internally like, he can't know that I have the nightmare in my head,
Mm-hmm.
And I like how the nightmare kind of like describes him, like Raven. Because he's like, look, is he with a mask made of stone? Captain, highwayman, or beast yet unknown? Of course, they're kind of like in a standoff because Elspeth's like, I don't know what's going to happen. Like the nightmare's waiting too to see like what Raven's next move is, because one, he's the captain of Destriers. Two, he is the highwayman that's trying to steal cards. Like, what is his motive, right? And so Elspeth is like, now what? Like, what are we going to do? And he's like, I'm not going to kill you. I'm not even going to arrest you, but we need to get inside. And Elspeth is like worried about like what he heard in her head. So she like questions him, like, what did you hear? Like, you used a nightmare card on me. Like, what did you hear in my head? He says nothing, like, even just a faint noise, a tapping or a clicking. But why do you ask? And she just like, pushes back and says, I didn't give you permission to enter. And he's like, well, I had no time to ask. Now with you plowing headfirst towards my uncle and half a dozen Destriers and the entirety of the king's knighthood. Basically, like, I was trying to protect you, so I did what I could.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I'm not going to the dungeon. Like, she still thinks like she's getting like arrested or kidnapped or something, And Raven's like, neither am I, Elspeth. Like, I can just picture him like so annoyed, like, just come on. Like, just come inside. Like, let's just talk. He's like, you're in no danger. You have my word. I don't care if you're infected. Like, I just want to know more, but I don't want to talk about this in an open field.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I have no magic. And he's like, well, you're a decent liar. He'll fit right in. And I just picture Raven like super sarcastic too, like just dry sense of humor.
Yeah. And like mildly irritated by her too. Like,
Yeah.
he has like an air of like, ew, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, like, just come on. And she's like, all right, fine, I'll go, but we're not going through the garden. And he's like, okay, we'll take the eastern entrance. And then he like kind of stops and is like, wait, how'd you know there's Providence cards in the garden? Like, she wants to avoid those. So now she's running off with the captain of Destriers.
Yep. She runs off. What does he do? He locks her in a room. And he's like, I'll be back. Don't worry. And she's like, cool. When he returns, he walks in with his sister, Jesper, a stranger that she doesn't know. And he comes back in. And the stranger she doesn't know is a physician. She is basically like, why don't you just run me over with your dagger now, Raven? Why don't you just kill me now, basically? And he's like, can you please stop being so dramatic for like 3 seconds while we figure this out? And the nightmare says that he's going to test her magic, more specifically, his magic. And that's kind of the vibe of this meeting here. Elspeth decides to take the route of, as they're questioning her, I'm going to tell most of the truth. The best lies are laced with truth. She ends up telling them that she was infected when she was 9 and that her magic shows her the Providence card, not that her magic is having the nightmare monster invading her head. This is very interesting to Raven as they're trying to collect these cards, and having someone who can physically see them and see where they're hiding proves fairly beneficial for their quest to find these cards. And she explains to them, like, these cards have their colorful magical signature, and that's what I can see. The physician, though, as he's talking to her, is like, well, surely, clearly she has magic, so she must be degenerating in some way. And Elspeth says, like, she has not seen signs of her degeneration yet, and she has yet to discover what her debt for this magic is going to be. So Alma ends up joining them in the room as well.
And they kind of test her. So they leave for a second, then they come back. Raven pulls out a white eagle. He's like, all right, what color do you see? She like mentions the card kind of like almost flickered out when it was in Raven's pocket until he put it on the table. It's just like a note for later on. And so she says white. And he's like, do they appear to you even when like your eyes are closed? She's like, yep. And he's like, all right, would you be okay being blindfolded? Like, can we test this out? Because these guys want to find all the cards. Like, they are determined, whatever it takes. And so after, she goes through it all, they test her out with a false card and the real card. And she's like, did I pass? And they're like, well, it certainly appears you can see them. And you've managed to hide your infection from all the physicians and the Destriers. And despite being Eric's daughter, they ask her, like, does anybody else know about your ability? And she's like, nope. Don't believe her, right? Like another lie. And she's like, no, like nobody knows. My family merely thinks I caught the fever. And so the nightmare kind of purrs to her and says, make him an offer. See what he'll give. Be indispensable. Because she's still like, they can report me still, like there's nothing stopping them from kind of turning her in. And so she pushes back and says, I know you want the Providence cards. And I know you don't want the king to find out. So I'll help you. And I won't tell anyone that you and the prince moonlight as highwaymen. And in turn, you'll keep my secret. She's like, but you have to promise me something. And she says, I want you to leave my family alone and don't punish them for hiding my infection. And Raven's like, okay, if that's what you wish. He's like, don't go back to my cousin or my uncle's house because he carries no cards that you have not already shown me today. And they're like, what? Why didn't you tell us this earlier? And she's like, well, I wasn't going to tell a man with a knife to my chest how to steal from my own family. She says, like, there's one last thing. Like, you must swear, Captain, that no matter the circumstance, you will never use the nightmare card on me again. And he doesn't for a while. I mean, this is chapter 8, and he doesn't use it. So, spoiler, he doesn't use it till, like, later in, like, the 20s.
Yeah, like the late 20s chapters, I think.
Yeah.
For good reason. At that point. So basically, after this kind of back and forth, she ends up deciding, well, they kind of decide for her that she's going to work with them. She's going to work with them to find the rest of these cards. They do test her one more time, and they test her with I believe it's the chalice, if I'm not mistaken, because she has her choice in cards. And she ends up having this truth serum through the chalice. This makes it really hard for her to not give up all of her information. Instead, she, with the help of Nightmare in her head, finds a way to like work through the truth serum, which is something that no one really does. Like, it's kind of impossible, but with the help and the power of Nightmare in her head, she's able to kind of make it through this additional test. And the plan that they end up forging for her to be able to help them acquire the rest of their cards is that they're going to begin a fake courtship between her and Raven so she can go live with them on their property and take part in this treasonous, traitorous behavior secretly with the family as the front that she is courting Raven, or Raven is courting her, rather.
So they make it like a public appearance. They hold hands in front of, everybody at the court. Another interesting thing is like Elspeth has another run-in with Emery, and he like sees deeper into like Elspeth and like her secrets and everything. And we know that like magic comes with a price. And so she says like, Emery, you and his strange dark magic has truly seen every last one of my secrets. And Emery just like tells her, it twists and it calls through the shadowy halls. Be wary the voice that comes in the night. And then Elspeth says like before she could even shiver, like Emery just kind of threw up and coughed up blood. And the Nightmare just comments, shame, I was just beginning to like him. And so like Emery like to me is like going crazy, right? Like people just think he's like going crazy, and he like tries to escape a few times, and he's not living at the U house, he's living at Stone, which is pretty interesting.
As they start working together, they show her the collection of cards that they've acquired, and it turns out that they're only missing 3 cards. So they're missing the Twin Elders, of course. They're missing the Well, and also the Iron Gate. And this is where we find out that Elspeth happens to know someone who owns a Well card. He lives just up the street and happens to be her father.
Yep.
So, how convenient, how casual. We love to see it.
They're following through with the courtship. So she is now living at the U Castle, which is rumored to be haunted. But Jesper comes and wakes Elspeth up and is like, the Pine family is coming. And she's like, oh, what is going on? They're like, well, we think that the like patriarch of the family has a card. So we need your help to kind of talk to the daughters and the mom to try to figure it out. They do, and Elspeth doesn't really know like how to bring it up. She brings up how Ione, her father, gave like the Nightmare card and she got a maiden card. Elspeth is like, okay, here, this is what I'm thinking, I can also talk about how like her father was given a card as her mother's dowry. And so she asked the daughters, like, does your father have any cards set aside for your dowry? Gerda replies, in theory, that I suspect Papa's too fond to let them go. But they confirmed that the patriarch of the father of the Pine family has Iron Gate. So they come up with a plan to kind of ambush them when they're coming home from Stone to kind of get this Iron Gate.
Let me tell you, that sequence of events was where things really just like picked up. And let's be totally transparent here for a second. So we're like somewhere in this halfway point of this book, right? This chunk of the book was like, I barely remember what happened. We're recounting stuff and I was like, they had tea? Interesting. Okay. This half of the book, completely worth it. Absolutely worth it. This was like a little bit of world building, but I feel like there could have been like a little extra something in there. This chunk, yes, absolutely.
100%. At the Castle U, at the House U, whatever we want to call it, Elspeth is just kind of walking around the gardens, and Raven runs into her and is like, oh, do you want a tour? And so he kind of like takes her around the grounds, and he doesn't know any of the names of the plants and flowers, but he does know the trees. So she listens to him as he kind of talks about this, and they head out to like the ruins, which is the original castle, or what's kind of left of it. As they're heading out there, the Nightmare's interest kind of like stirs in her mind. It's just like dewy grass, enormous trees, and the graveyard of stonework. It's just a crumpled castle that's like nestled in the mist out back. And she doesn't realize that there's another castle there. And Raven's like, well, it's older than stone, and nobody knows exactly when it's forged or when it fell. But only one room remains. And the nightmare is just like clawing in her mind and like inhaling deeply. She like gestures to the stone chamber and is like, what's that? And it's like the last room standing. So it's a stone chamber enveloped by moss and vine, and it's just standing tall at the edge of the mist. And it just looks strange, and it was like alone in amongst all the ruins. And it was unmarked but for one dark window on the southernmost wall. And the nightmare is like in her head, like, go in. And she's like, go in where? There? The nightmare's like, yes, I want to see it. And Elspeth like talks back, in her head to the nightmare, like, there's no door, only a window. That's all she ever required. And Elspeth's like, who? And the nightmare replies, the spirit of the wood. She can feel like his desperation and like wanting her to take him to this last standing room of the castle, but she like denies him the request. And Raven's just obliviously talking, just telling her the stories and like, yep, the rumors are folklore mostly. If this place was truly haunted and ghosts linger here, they're not keen to show themselves. At least not to him, because he has the mirror card, which, as we know, like excessive use of that would kind of thin that veil and you could see ghosts. She asks him about the nightmare card and is like, well, what are the ill effects of the nightmare card? And she's like, do you see a creature or hear a voice? He like replies, well, everybody's like experiences are very different, and like the negative effects are different. And then he kind of explains, like, I don't see a creature, but I hear him. And he says most of the time he doesn't say anything, but when he does, it's like he knows every thought I've ever feared. And just telling him that he's going to fail and that his efforts are meaningless. But Raven says it's a voice, not a creature. And Elspeth is like curious because, she has the nightmare in her head and is like, is this what everybody hears? Like, is that the negative effect? But Raven replies like, no, because when he speaks, it's not a stranger's voice, it's his own. So that's where I feel like she's like, something's a little different.
Now they're off to try and steal the Iron Gate. There's a moment that I think is kind of funny where Elspeth is trying to get onto the horse, and the horse, she said animals don't like her very much because the horse can sense like the nightmare inside of her. So she gets yeeted off this horse, right? And everyone's laughing because, it's Elm and Jesper and all of them. So she ends up having to ride on this horse with Elm, who is less than thrilled, less than enthused about this information. And before they leave, they get her fitted with a knife, just things to protect her in the forest. She was like, am I expected to fight? Like, what is this? And they were like, no, but you should be able to basically protect yourself. Little do they know that she has mystical powers of the nightmare living inside of her. They get to where they need to go, and Raven actually does apologize for attacking her that night when she was on the path. The prophet card that they used to figure out she was going to be there, it has some plot holes. There's some gaping holes in the plot there. They didn't know what they were stepping into, but Raven emphasizes that she is very special and very much needed for what they're doing. As they're getting ready, he fits her with a mask, and unfortunately, things go south very quickly.
Yes, because it's not just the Pine family that is in this carriage of people.
It is not, unfortunately.
The prince is also in one of the carriages.
And let memory serve me correct for once, please God, but her father is also there.
Yep.
Eric Spindle.
Yes, he is. And so all of a sudden they're under attack.
Yes.
She spots the Iron Gate, which is their goal, right? That's the card that they want to steal. And she yells out to Raven, like, it's in Pine's cloak, right side. The Destroyers are now going after the Highwaymen. Like, it's a whole fiasco, right? Just a cluster going on. Her vision's spinning, like, she's not made for combat. Like,
no. Just a little side note, because there is something that comes up with Jesper and the charms here. But something that we did not mention about the mist is that normal people who do venture into the mist carry with them some sort of charm. I would think of it as like our modern day, like quote unquote good luck charm, like a rabbit's foot, a 4-leaf clover, something like that. And that's thought to kind of protect them as a barrier between the spirit of the wood, the mist, going crazy, all of that fun stuff. So even though Elspeth carries one, the children who were infected with the magic don't actually need a charm to get through the wood because their magic is inherently already a part of them. And that's just a little tidbit there.
So yes, they get in this like tussle. The highwaymen, the Destroyer, Eric Spindle, Hoth, and it's just like a shit show. Like, you know, Elspeth ends up like hitting her father over the head to save Jesper, right? I think to save Jesper or Elm. Hoth ends up like breaking her wrist, and like she like turns in, like she asks the nightmare for help, and so she turns into the nightmare basically. Like her fingers, her nail like claws, and she like ends up clawing the prince, and it's just like a lot happens in this whole thing. It's all tussle.
And on top of that, Jesper loses the charm that she had and starts to go fucking insane in the mist.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to save Jesper and get her out. She's going blind. She can't see anything. And they're like, this is all bad. State of emergency, timeout. We gotta fucking reevaluate here. Oh, at the end when they're like finally recouped, they're finally taking a tally of what the fuck happened. And they did recover the Iron Gate. That is one thing that they did. But an interesting thing toward the end was Raven was like, you never said how you got away from Hoth. And Elspeth kind of stiffens and the nightmare's laugh kind of creeps forward in her voice. I've noticed this in fantasy books. I don't know if you do too. Because they're in their own world, they repeat a lot of phrases. Like, there are certain things that are said consistently that I don't think we would notice as much in like our terminology, like maybe in a romance book or something. But here I noticed it a lot in the things that they said. I noticed it even in Throne of Glass. But she specifically says like the low notes in my voice were slick as if dipped in oil. And she refers to that oil a lot in terms of how the nightmare speaks through Elspeth.
Mm-hmm.
But Elspeth does say, perhaps it was he who got away from me. Which I thought was interesting because she just told Raven like 2 chapters ago that the only weapon she's ever wielded were garden shears.
Yeah.
And she just fell off of a horse. So
after that too, like Raven and Elspeth are talking, and he like tells her too, like, the way you came out running out of the woods, like I didn't think it was you. And he's like, it's just kind of hard to explain. He's like, it's just sometimes when I look at you, I feel like I know you, understand you, and other times your eyes flash yellow. And so this is what he's telling, you know, Elspeth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel a stillness about you. I don't recognize you, a darkness. She just doesn't say anything. And so Raven keeps going and is just like, well, you know, there is a darkness in all of us. We don't need the Book of Alders, the old Book of Alders, to tell us that. Well, you and I carry the infection, and with it, strange bright magic. But there's always a price. Nothing comes for free. And they just kind of ride back in silence.
Yeah.
And she's just like thinking, like searching for the nightmare since the whole mayhem in the woods. And
what I love, I'm not going to lie, because so this is where like they were fake courting, but you could always tell there was like a little something. But
yes,
Raven does say to her, there's a lot going to be going on in the few coming days. Like, do you want all of the eyes on us? Like, do we want to keep pretending to do this? And Raven tells her, of all the things I pretend at, courting you has proven the easiest. And I was like, oh, does it now, Raven? Does it?
right. And so earlier when they were kind of walking around the gardens, like Elspeth like made herself a little flower crown, and Raven put a rose down and put it in there. And so once they kind of part ways and she goes to her bedroom, she finds the flower crown like back on her bed. And I just think that's cute that he like saved that for her.
I agree.
That night she has like another like vision, dream, whatever you want to call it. And she stood in an ancient room covered in vines. She is seated upon the dark stone in the center of the room the same night that she saw in her last dream. And same with his gold armor, but it had lost all its glisten and it was kind of dull. The knight still didn't see her. She kind of like waited till he saw her, and he like greets her, Elspeth Spindle, and his eyes so strange and yellow. He just says, "Let me out." And the room bursts into flames. Then she like kind of gets out of the vision and she's alone in her chamber in Castle Yude, like no flames, nothing, and just morning light. She looks into the mirror, like in her chamber, and she like freezes because what she sees staring back at her is a creature, neither man or animal, just fur, pointed ears, just staring back at her with yellow eyes. And then she like blinked and looked again, and the face was hers again. It's kind of like, it's scary for her. Like she, feels terror, and just like her eyes have gone glossy, and she like recalls that her aunt told her that her strange charcoal eyes were special and like a dark window to the soul beneath. When she looked at her reflection again, her black eyes like flickered to a bright eerie yellow, and she just had to wonder whose soul was it, the nightmares or hers. So Ione actually comes to Castle U. Elspeth like describes her as like the most beautiful woman she's ever seen. Like, so the maiden card is definitely like working.
Yep.
And she can tell it's working too because Ione just seems kind of cold. Like she doesn't really have that like familiar, like loving vibe that her cousin always had.
Yeah, she lost like all of her warmth. And I think, I feel like that must have been so hard for Elspeth. Like, Ione was her person growing up. Like, that was her, she doesn't like her stepsisters very much. She's not close with her family because they had to protect her and ship her off. So now losing Ione on top of all of this shit has to be just miserable.
Yep. But Ione reveals that like she didn't come to see Elspeth. She came to find Hoth because him and the Destriers are training there. Elspeth thinks to her and she's like, oh my gosh, like Hoth's here, like the man who tried to twist my arm off.
Yep.
And he's like, well, two birds, one stone. Like I can see him and I can see you. And she's like, I haven't been to Castle U since I was a girl, back when I was sure that it was haunted. And looks, just kind of says, who says it isn't haunted? Dun dun dun. Horror novel. You guys didn't know that, did you?
Surprise. We're back in September House.
Castle U. American Horror Story Murder House Part 3.
Subset, a magical card edition. So
Totally joking.
They end up, she's chatting with Ione, and Ione basically is like throwing shade, like, I can't believe you would be courting Raven. I can't believe these things. But they end up having a moment where she talks to Hoth. She notices this like gaping claw mark, like 4 scratches that are super deep in his neck running down. She asks the nightmare, like, Demi? That you? Was that us? And he's like, listen, babe, if you have to ask, you're not ready to know the answer to that.
And so they kind of talk all together about how, the highwaymen jumped the Destriers as they were traveling and kind of like what happened, Hoth is like, I don't know what happened. Like, maybe he had like blades in his gloves. I don't know. Like Raven like kind of challenges Hoth and is like, you guys couldn't escape highwaymen. Like highwaymen are just a bunch of like dog, like just separate them and you should be able to. And so he puts on like kind of a show, like a training, like, all right, I'll show you how to stop a highwayman, and ends up like stomping on Hoth's wrist. And Elspeth like, is after and like talks to Elm, and she's like, what just happened? And her and Elm are sitting there, and Elm just shrugs, and his green eyes lingering on Ione's shape in the distance. And Elm says back to Elspeth, like, Hoth broke your wrist, and now Raven mangled his hand. Balance. So basically, Raven was just like showing off.
I do love that. Like, that is one of my favorite edges of like touch her and you die, or like touch her and I will like take care of you. Yeah. I do love that vibe.
And so she is walking back to her room, and she kind of overhears something. And so she overhears Elm say, like, we have no idea what happened in the woods. Like, Spindle, her abilities. And Raven just is like, are incredible. She saved your life. I think she earned a reprieve from your usual hostility. And Elm's like, I'm not saying I'm not grateful, but we should be careful. Like, Hoth looked like he had been attacked by an animal, not a woman. And there's so much we don't know about her. And Elm, like, is pushing, like, Raven to use his nightmare card on her. And Raven's, like, very adamant, like, no, I'm not going to do that because she hasn't consented. Like, all of you guys have consented, given me permission to enter your mind, but she said no. And she has no permission.
Yep.
And Elm, like, is like, come on, Raven, like, breaking Hoth's hand, like, enjoyable that was, it was reckless. Like, we can't make mistakes. And, like, telling him, like, you can't let your guard down, especially not for her. And she, like, quickly, like, goes into her room and shuts the door. And Raven comes to her door, leans against the door frame. You know that. You know, like, have you seen the TikTok trend of, like, the guys, like, leaning on the door frame? That's just what I picture.
Yes. Yes.
They just kind of talk about, like, how he, like, broke Hoth's wrist. And he's like, you know, we do have a hostile relationship, you know, me and my cousin. Raven's like, you know, Hoth hates infection more than most, and he hates that his father made me captain. And Hoth, we find out, is the one who told the king about his infection. And 10 years later, he did the same when Emery caught the fever too. And Raven's like, well, that's not why I came to see you. He wants to show her something. And she's like, nope, let's go.
So Raven takes her out to the ruins again, and the nightmare is like pushing her inside. Like, you need to go inside, you need to go inside. And she's like, ooh, it looks scary. I would prefer to not do that. And the nightmare's like, go, go, go. And Raven is like, I played in here as a child. Everything's fine. When she walks in, she has this flash of realization that the room that they're in is the room that she's been seeing in her nightmares and in these visions that she's been receiving. She asks the nightmare, like, what is it? Like, what is this? And Nightmare says, a place of time, a man of fault, both fueled by rage, both buried in salt. Because this fucker can't say anything straight up. It has to be in a riddle. Raven ends up showing her there's this slab, the stone slab kind of in the center. Raven slices his palm to get some blood and places it on the stone. And when he does that, the Providence cards that are hidden within the depths of the stone are unlocked by blood, specifically infected magical blood, which is why Raven can access it.
The nightmare actually says to Elspeth, an offering, bartered with blood. That's how the spirit bargains, always with blood. So the Shepherd King built her this chamber at the edge of the woods, this altar, and here they bartered. And Elspeth's like, how do you know so much about it? And the nightmare, like, doesn't answer her. And Raven's like, I wanted you to know about this because if something happens to me, like, you need to know how to open this, because only, like, somebody with magical blood is able to do this. And so Raven continues to and says that the king, once he found out about his infection, you know, saw value in it. So instead of, like, killing him, was like, oh, well, it makes him a better fighter. So, you know, the chalice doesn't work for him, but neither does it work against him. So, and nobody could see him in the well cards. The king saw great value in Raven, so did not care about his infection. And we kind of learn about Elm, because Elm is, you know, the son of the king, right? But, like, he doesn't live there and really, like, does not want anything to do with it. And we find out that, like, Elm was, like, a clever child, but the king just, like, did not like him. Like, thought he was weak and mild, and Hoth, like, brutalized him when they were younger. So Raven kind of just, like, brought him home. He just became basically one of the U's, like, you know, instead of just being cousins, like, they became brothers more than anything. They seal the cards back up, and Elspeth actually cuts her hand to seal it up. And so they have this little moment, and Raven tells her, and she, like, pushes the hair out of Raven's face, and they have, like, this little moment, and he's like, I can feel your pulse. Your heart is racing. They're, you know, Taylor Swift lyric, right? Invisible string that tied me. So she, like, feels tethered to the captain of the Destriers and just, like, how close they were. And And Elspeth's like, I don't know why my heart's racing. And he's like, you don't? With like a little smile, like a little half smile. And they kiss, but that's
They
it.
kiss. Yeah.
They like stop pretending and they, their lips collide. They're among the salt.
Also, how many times, I want to know when he growled, how many times do these people growl in each other's mouths?
Right?
Like,
she then sees the gold armor, like the knight again, and the man in her dreams. And she says that he watched, like, as she stood with the captain of the Destriers and just said again, Elspeth Spindle, let me out. And so she, like, rips away from Raven and, like, trying to, like, not scream and, like, freak out. Of course, then the knight was gone. Raven's kind of like, okay. Like, Elspeth's on the move. Just like, I gotta go. And, like, gone through the window.
yeah.
It, like, does not turn back. And Raven doesn't pursue her. And she's, like, crying at, like, heading back to the castle, just thinking, like, what's happening to me? Am I losing my mind? Like, her and the nightmare kind of have this back and forth. And she's like, enough, nightmare, tell me the truth. Who is that man? Why do I keep seeing him? And of course, Nightmare's like, he is of the past, haunting the chamber he built for the spirit of the wood. Nothing more than a memory of a man who once was. A man I once was. And she, like, slams her door, and she sees, like, in the carpet of her room, the gilded armor on top of a black horse. And it's the knight from the chamber. Only now she kind of sees the object. Like, she sees the doorless chamber, like, one dark window is, like, in the tree line of this carpet. She has, like, this, like, memory from her youth that came slamming into her, and she saw herself as a little girl, like, poring over the Book of Alders and fixed on, like, the Nightmares card pages. She said she had so certain I'd been the creature in my mind that was the embodiment of the card itself, the monster and its cover matching him entirely, that she failed to understand what was written a few pages prior. And this is what was written a few pages prior. But it felt incomplete, my collection yet whole. And so for the nightmare, I bartered my soul. And she just thinks, like, I absorbed your soul when I touched a nightmare card, which makes you, to the nightmare in her head, the Shepherd King. The nightmare replies, finally, my darling Elspeth, we understand one another. And I was wondering that the whole time, because I was like, this is, like, the Shepherd King.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, like, when is he going to come into play? Like, all right, he's this, like, random guy,
Yes. Like,
I was waiting for him to, like, make his debut, and, like, I did not put two and two together because I just take a book for face value. Like,
all vibes,
kudos to
no
you
thought.
if you did. But when, like, this happened, I was like, ah! I think I was like, I don't think I'm going to finish this tonight, and I couldn't put it down after this. Like,
yes.
After this reveal, 2 hours later in this podcast, here we are, guys.
Here we are. We're here. We're probably going to cut out a lot of that in between stuff. It's fine. The problem is there's like 8,000 characters, a giant magic system, and there's some shit that happens that leads up to it. But now that we know who the nightmare is, she has this, like, communication with him, right? This is where my brain connects all the dots. I'm like, I remember this part. And she has this communication with the nightmare, and she realizes that, in more or less words, she tries to coax it out of the nightmare, and he's like, you know what this is? And she's like, just tell me what's happening to me. Because Philip finds her sleepwalking the next morning through the one dark window. She's never had this happen before, and she's starting to lose, like, a sense of control and a sense of self. And Elspeth comes to the realization that she is degenerating, and her degeneration comes from every time the nightmare lends her his power. But he does say he does not take from her willingly. It has to be given. And so every time she has asked for help and allowed him access to her, she is given a part of herself to him. And he is becoming stronger. His thoughts are becoming more prominent. That's why she can see the visions and his memories that are coming to life. The Shepherd King had to give a piece of his soul, like we talked about, to forge the last card. And so now she has the soul of a Shepherd King in the body of a nightmare monster living inside of her brain that's slowly taking her over. So that's super cute and fun.
And then they go to Market Day.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they run into the High Prince there, and he notices like Elspeth's wrist. He like touches it and she like freezes because it's so like painful. You can tell he's like suspicious, and Ione's like, she fell off a horse, like she's fine, you know. And the High Prince like doesn't believe it, like, okay, whatever. But she's like still worried that like, you know, he recognized the injury, and they're like, I think it's okay. I think it's okay. Elspeth tries to get Elm to like sneak off to go get the well card from her father, because she's like, everybody's out right now. Like, let's go to Spindle House. Let's go get it.
Just go get it.
He's like, no, we have to keep up this pageantry. Like, as part of the whole thing. Like, part of the plan. Yeah, we can't be reckless. So at Market Day, there becomes this whole scene, right, where they make an example of this family. So this father and mother that has been harboring their child that has the fever. Elspeth like freaks out because she's like, we can't let this happen. Like, this cannot happen. She has Elm like switch her cloaks and masks and ask for his help, like the Scythe card, to kind of help this family escape and the kid escape. And so he's like running through the mist. She has a run-in with one of the destriers, and she asks the Nightmare for help, and you know, takes him down, and it's just this whole mess. Like,
yeah,
Elspeth is trying to be the hero, and
it's so bad. And like the way that Hoth is making like a public spectacle of this is unlike anything that they've really seen or dealt with before. Like, it is instilling so much fear in the people at Market Day, and the way that he's handling it, like like whipping the parents, sending them straight into the forest with no charms to go crazy and die. It's just, it is not the way that things are done, but it's the way that Hoth wants them done to prove a point and to make a very specific show of what would happen when he finds out this kind of information.
Elspeth ends up, you know, getting the boy out, running to safety, kind of like lets him go off in the mist, like says, go find your parents, like give them this charm, they're gonna have to share it. She like has a run-in with Lyndon, one of the destriers, and when Raven finally finds her, like he tells her like, you're safe, just breathe. But then he like looks at her and is like, your eyes are yellow. And you know, Elspeth's just thinking like, please go away, like she says to the Nightmare. And then Raven like goes to like touch her hand, and her hand is like curled like claws, and her fingers, long and pale, are just covered in blood. And Raven like recoils from her. Then he goes into like, I feel like captain mode, right? He's like, all right,
Yes.
like wiping the blood off, and you know, just kind of takes care of her and like asking her questions like, who is it? And he's like, it was Lyndon. He's like, I don't know, he's hurt somewhere in the wood, or the boys somewhere in the wood. Like, and she like doesn't know like exactly what she did, right? So she like asked the Nightmare again, like, what did you do? The Nightmare's like, we did it together, just like we always do. And he's like, you asked for my help and I delivered.
Yep.
And Raven like asks her again, like, what is that yellow that flickers through your eyes? And Elspeth's just like, I can't tell you. You won't want anything to do with me if I tell you. And he's just like, your estimation of me is lower than I imagined. And so Raven and Hoth kind of have like a standoff. And Raven's, what the fuck do you think you're doing? Like, you called for a public execution on Market Day? Hoth's like, huh, yeah, I have the right to execute any person guilty of harboring an infected. You know, Raven like takes it personally, like, you know, well, not personally, but it's kind of like, you did this behind my back. If it's command you want of the Destriers, then take it. And like kind of challenges him.
Yeah.
Like Raven pushes back, like, see, like he's not gonna come up for a challenge. Like, your prince is just a prince. Tells Hoth like, you do not disrupt Blunder's peace or force its citizens to witness cruelty. Like, you are shadows as silent as swift. You are keepers of our word, like clever and good. That is what he like tells to his Destriers. And of course they want to follow like Raven. Obviously they respect Raven, I feel like, more than Hoth.
Totally. Yeah, because Hoth is a piece of shit.
Yeah. And like Hoth like doesn't say anything, and Hoth is just like, well, we had no commands to obey and you were nowhere to be found. And he's like, well, even now your attention seems to be concentrated elsewhere. You could tell like Hoth is definitely like jealous, right, of that whole situation of Raven in general. And so Elspeth like realizes that they've like saved infected children before, and Elm's like, yeah, that's the entire point of collecting the deck. Or did you imagine we were just committing treason for a laugh?
Well, With Elm, anything is possible, to be honest.
Right?
I do love Elm. I feel like Elm is like a good comedic reprieve from everything. Like,
Yeah. I know that he has a bigger role, I think, in the second book,
yeah, I'm excited.
which I think is fun.
Yeah.
And Raven gets word that they have to get back to the castle, like ASAP, like from his father. And they find out that Emery has run away. Emery has run away from the castle, from Stone, and now is at Castle U.
He is like freezing, blue lips. They're like, let's get him together. He starts kind of going off about the Shepherd King to Elspeth because, as we know from Emery's degeneration, he can like really see into the soul of someone, like he knows who they are. So he tells Elspeth, "You're very beautiful. Your eyes are so dark, so infinite, like a maiden in a storybook, as if the Shepherd King had penned you himself." The nightmare is like laughing in her head because he's a taunting son of a bitch and is like, look at him. He has death knocking at his doorstep and he understands you better than everyone. Emery goes on to talk about how the Shepherd King is a descendant of the Yu family. And everyone is like, this is just legend. Like, you know, not this again. Like, not this rumor, not this folklore. He said the Shepherd King's history is that, you know, he dwelled somewhere else because the stone was built by the first Rowan king. And so the ruins are super old, but the oldest thing there are the trees. And he's like, look around the property. What lines this property? Yew trees. The Shepherd King was a yew. And everyone is like rolling their eyes at him. And he's like, listen to me, guys. Listen, I know what I'm talking about. And by that, I mean, like, he's just lackadaisically, like, glazed over telling them this information. Because I imagine when I picture Emery, I just kind of picture, like, the lead paint stare. Like, you know, the one, like this.
Yeah.
Just staring. Elm and Raven do have another kind of argument because Elm just does not trust that Elspeth's magic is only limited to finding cards. And he basically just calls Raven a fool for trusting her. But Raven said that he's instilled all of his trust into Elspeth. So they just kind of go back and forth about that. And Elm just basically tells him, like, you need to be careful. I feel like the romance was definitely like a subplot within this book, but Raven and Elspeth end up sleeping together. And it did kind of feel like a little bit of 0 to 100 for a second because they just shared like on page, one kiss?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. It's like, it's olden times. Like, what the fuck else do they have to do? Search for the cards and fuck each other? I think that's about it, right?
They can't watch The Traitors.
No, they can't watch The Traitors.
Or Survivor.
No. And instead, that's all that they have. But they end up sleeping together, and the scene is like mildly graphic, but not terribly graphic, just if that's something that you watch out for. I feel like Raven is a little bit smooth with some of the things he says too, and I'm like, okay, Raven. Like, I think we mentioned it earlier, probably off camera, but it was like, they're literally in the middle of undressing, and he's like, can I kiss you? She's like, I feel like it's a little late for that. And he's like, not on your mouth, Elspeth. And she's like, oh shit. Yeah, okay. No problem. That's fine.
Like, oh, we're okay, let's go.
Yeah, like, let's do this. Unfortunately, the romance kind of peters out here due to the nature of other things happening to her.
And like at breakfast the next morning, like Elma's like looking at Raven and is like, what the hell is wrong with you? And he's like, what do you mean? And Elma's like, you're smiling. Does anyone else think this is weird? And then like Jesper like basically caught Elspeth like coming out of Raven's room, so she like knows. Elspeth like kicks Jesper under the table. She like makes a comment, and then Elm like looks at everybody, and like Elspeth like gets really red, and Elm's like, well, and just like that, I've lost my appetite. And it's like, oh, all right, no, what happened? Nope. And then of course Emery ruins the mood and ends up coughing up blood, and they knew that he had to go back to Stone today.
Yep.
Like Raven and Elspeth have a little moment and they kiss, and Emery's like, oh, I found them. They were kissing. Just like, like little kid.
Yeah.
Alma's just like, oh my gosh, all right, Well, he says trees, not oh my gosh. Trees, we get it. No need to rub our noses in it. And I like how Emery he's like, you know, I just picture him like sighing, like, here I was thinking she'd come to kiss me. That's how the fairy tale goes, isn't it? Beautiful maiden saves a sick boy with a kiss. Boy miraculously heals and delivers the kingdom from dark magic. And Alma's like, well, except in this fairy tale, the maiden has blood on her hands.
Oh,
I just like Alma and Emery's little like
totally
banter. And so she like runs after Emery, and like Raven and Elmer are still talking, and she like asks Emery to use his magic to kind of see like what's inside her. And Emery says, well, I see a woman with long black hair and charcoal eyes. I see a yellow gaze narrowed by hate. I see darkness and shadow. And I see your fingers long and pale, covered in blood. And she asks, like, do you see the Shepherd King? Anybody in gold armor? And Emery is like, no, I see a creature curled around your spine as if woven into you. And he says, you don't have long, Elspeth, like he is close. He hunches, not an animal, not man, but something in between. He stands in the room. He built for the spirit of the wood, perched upon a tall, dark stone. And he whispers something. Emery says this is what he whispers. There once was a girl, clever and good, who tarried in shadow in the depths of the wood. There was also a king, a shepherd by his crook, who reigned over magic and wrote the old book. The two were together, the two were the same. And of course, we said this earlier in the book too, like one of the first chapters. And Elspeth finished. The girl, the king, and then the nightmare finished, and the monster they became. Then she's like worried. She's like, oh my gosh, Emery, don't say anything. And he's like, well, my degeneration I won't remember the next day. And then we are on to part 3. The final stretch here.
we're almost there. So part 3 is called The Blood. I don't know if we've mentioned the names of either of the other parts, but we're here now. So
I don't think
Elspeth has another dream, and this dream involves children. They're running through all of the trees. She's trying to lift them through the window one by one. When she awakens, she is actually covered in dirt and also blood. Then she wakes up again, and she's like, okay, this was just a dream. This was just a dream. But then she looks down, and she's in her bed, but her arms are muddy. She has broken fingernails. Everything is ragged. And the nightmare is fully in her head at that point, and is like, she wants him to leave, and he's like, I can't do this. I protect your soul. Like, I protected you as a child from the physicians. When the High Prince stalked you, who protected you? When they came for your throat, who protected you? King Rowan has held you at the end of a noose from the moment the infection touched your blood, and the only reason your neck did not snap was because I was there holding you up by your legs. And she kind of fights back and is like, but if I had died, you would have too. So don't pretend this is just because you care for me. That's self-preservation at that point. You know, she's like, there's too much at stake today. We're going for this well card. He is like, you have so little time, Elspeth. She asks what the hell that means, and the nightmare just disappears.
so. Her half-sisters are having a little celebration.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the perfect time for them to kind of look for the well card.
Yes.
So they arrive. They like split up and go to search the house while people are distracted.
Yep.
So they have no luck finding the well card. They like split up, and then they're summoned to come downstairs. And Ione brings them to the table and is like, all right, let's cheers to the twins, you know. And I knew right away. So this is where I warned you guys, fourth wing spoilers coming out, because that's like my most recent read. Well, not really. I've read a lot since then.
No, but like, it's
like
very
there's like
front of
just little
mind.
similarities that like, so she like takes a drink of this chalice and is like, something tastes weird, and I'm like, girl,
Girl,
come on.
They set it down, and I was like, this is a trap. This is a fucking trap. What are we doing? Like, this is like when
come on.
When Violet's like, oh, that's a little weird. What's happening? And Elspeth does the same thing, and I'm like, bitch, you're smarter than this. And how come Nightmare didn't go forward? And it's like, oh, bitch, you probably shouldn't drink that.
Yeah. And so like Elm realizes, you know, that Ione is like under a Scythe card.
Yeah.
Like too late, you know, and then Hoth appears at the table and is like, guess what? I used the chalice card. You guys just all drank truth serum. Let's go. Like, let's all play an intense game of truth or dare.
Okay, like, this was not a book that gave me a lot of, like, anxiety and stuff. Like, there are some books that, so unfortunately, you guys, my brain is only Throne of Glass right now. Like, that is the only thing that's in my mind. And the intense pain, anxiety, and suffering I felt while reading Kingdom of Ash, I didn't feel that, when reading this, but when they did the Truth or Dare game, I was like, oh, hell no.
Yeah, that was the only time that I was stressed out. I'm like,
Yeah, I was
what
like,
is happening right now? Because, like, with the chalice and with the truth serum, like, you are basically forced to tell the truth. If you fight it, like, you, like, feel like you're, like, choking and you can't get anything out.
Yeah, and the worst part is, too, like, Elspeth is one of the only ones who can even remotely fight it. Hoth could just walk up to anyone and be like, is Elspeth infected? Tell me right now. What's her magic?
Right? It doesn't work on Raven, though. So Hoth is like, well, it's no use, like, asking him anything. But Raven is able to use the Nightmare card to kind of coach Jesper and Elm kind of how to, like, half-truth it.
Yep.
So they can still, like, tell the truth without, like, revealing too much. So he's able to do that. But some of, like, the questions that come up, forced to say, is we find out that Hoth is cheated on Ione. Yep. And she's like, yep, you've been with other people. We find out that Elspeth.
Just the cheating, I'm like, it just started.
Right?
Like, it literally, like, it just started. How long is this, do we think? Like, I don't know, like, what the timeline is here.
A month?
It has to be, like, I would say, like, a month or less. If he's already cheating on her. And she has the maiden card, making her the literal most beautiful person you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Hoth can go to
Hoth is
hell.
a piece of shit, yeah. We also get Elspeth to reveal that she loves Raven.
Ooh, which 4 weeks.
I know, I was, like, expecting, like, fated mates or something to come up, right? Like, something, like...
Yeah.
It could still in the second book, I don't know. But, like...
because she's mentioned, like, the invisible string, like, being, like, tied to him. But I do wonder if, like, the magic in their veins has them, like, in some weird way super connected to each other in a way that we, like, can't see yet or don't really understand.
Yeah. We find out, too, like, Hoth is jealous of Raven. So Elspeth goes last. Like, they all go around the table, like, turns, like, asking questions, like, getting the truth out of each other. And Elspeth is left last, and, like, Hoth is, like, ready to, like, pounce on her. Like, this is where it is, Yep. And so he's like, Hoth says, and now the one I've been waiting for, it's your turn to answer our questions, Miss Spindle. And the Nightmare is, like, in her head, like, just be easy now. Remember, the chalice is a card of truth. Like, it needs to be, like, pay attention to the question, because it's just as important as the answer. She, like, obviously fights every question that she's been, like, asked. And once she, like, fights off, like, they, like, try and stand up for her. Like, she doesn't have to answer, like, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, we all did. Like, Hoth's just been dying to ask her, like, what really happened to your arm? She, like, cannot tell the truth, right? She's just like, I was, and she's, like, choking on the word. And Ione tries to, like, step in, like, I told you she fell off a horse. And Hoth's like, no, stop. The Nightmares in her head, just like, sooner or later, the truth will come out. You said it yourself. And Elspeth is, like, panicking, like, I didn't mean like this,
Yeah.
Raven's like, let me help you. Let me help you. And she's like, no. But he already jumped in her head.
Yep.
And tries to calm her down. You can do this. Choose your words carefully. He asked you what happened, not how it happened. On top of freaking out about the chalice card, now Elspeth is freaking out that Raven's in her head. And she's like, no, I told you to get out. Like, no, you didn't do this.
Yeah.
The Nightmare appears in the head. So, in her head, it's like Raven and her. And then the Nightmare appears. And he just says, you heard her. Get out, Raven, you get out. And just like yells at Raven, and he, like, falls and just, like, is startled by that, right? Elspeth basically is poisoned. She just starts puking up blood.
Yeah.
Because she did not tell the truth. Because she tried to beat the chalice. And so, like, the negative effect of the chalice card is that the truth serum turns into poison. So,
yep.
She is poisoned.
Damn it, Elspeth.
Right.
And Raven was verbally assaulted by the Nightmare in her brain. So there's that too.
And so Raven is like, what the heck happened? And, like, is at, like, Elspeth's bedside because they were able to heal her and get her okay, but she's still kind of like weak and tired. And Raven and Elm are kind of talking about like what happened, and Raven's like, it's the weirdest thing. And he's like, I like heard a voice, like what was that voice? And so he enters her mind again, invited, and kind of like talks to the nightmare.
Yep.
And so Elspeth finally comes clean and is like, well, when I touched my uncle's nightmare card, I absorbed whatever the Shepherd King paid to create it. She revealed like that's what her actual magic is.
Yeah. And can we just briefly talk about again the nightmare is like, Raven's like, who are you? And this asshole is like, the shepherd of the shadow, the phantom of the fright, the demon in the daydream, the nightmare in the night. Like, this is a monster of the Dr. Seuss variety, you guys. And he really just loves his tricky rhymes and riddles. He really does.
He does. Yes, he does. So Raven's like, so if you absorb, like, Raven's trying to piece this all together, right? Like, so if he bartered his soul and you absorbed it, then the voice in your head is the Shepherd King. And Elm, like, looks like he was going to scream. Like, Elm is just like, in his head, I'm just thinking Elm is like, I knew it.
Yep.
So the three of them like talk about how, the Shepherd King has been kind of helping Elspeth, helping them find the cards. And I feel like Raven's like kind of hurt. Like, why didn't you tell me? Like, you could have trusted me.
Yep. I mean, like, I get it. I understand like the initial flicker of hurt. But literally imagine having a nightmare monster, literally called the Nightmare, living inside your brain, controlling you, turning you into a furry creature with claws that can actually murder people. And being like,
right?
Yeah, I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I'm so sorry.
And like the Nightmare and Raven like have this conversation in her head. And, the Nightmare is basically like, no, I protected her. Like when she let me loose, I protected her from a world that would see her killed. And I spoke to her from the old book. She was already good and clever, but I taught her to be wary. I gave her my gifts, my strength. Remember, nothing comes for free, especially not magic. Then Raven and Elm are pulled downstairs because the king wants to see them. And then her dad appears. And her dad brings with him the well card.
Yes.
Because he says that was the card that her mother gave him when they were courting. So now he's going to give it pass it on to Elspeth, and it's up to her to decide if she wants to give it to Raven or keep it or do whatever she wants. But it was her mother's card, so he feels like she should have it.
Totally.
So she makes it downstairs as the Dustriers are kind of leaving, and she like stops Raven, and she's like, I have the card. And he's like, you stole it from Eric? And she's like, no, he just gave it to me.
Yeah.
And so like Raven's like, all right, perfect. I'll like send, somebody to get it and keep it safe. And he like walks away and she like whispers out, be safe. And this is when I knew shit was going to go down.
Yes.
Because this line in it, like she says, had I known they'd be the last words I'd say to him out loud, I might have chosen them differently.
I was so mad because I was like, this is some fuck shit.
So I was like, somebody's going to die. But something worse happened.
Yeah, I agree.
The used physician, Philip, came in, got the well cards, dashed it. It's all good. Then her uncle appears and is like, oh, your aunt's looking for you. Come, she's in your room. And she's like, okay. And so she like, it's a little weary, but then she gets up there, and as soon as she like gets to her room, she realizes like it's a trap, and she sees Hoth. Hoth is like convinced her uncle to like help him and like also use like the Scythe card like to trap her. So now she's like in this room with Hoth. He's trying to use the Scythe card on her. She tells herself, it's not real. My mind has been tested, fortified. The sky's magic is merely a harsh rain, a storm to make me cower. And the Nightmare in her did not cower. So she was unable to be controlled by this card. The prince was like not letting up. The prince is like just like, I just picture him like on this like high like rant, right? Just like, you think I'm a fool that I didn't wonder at your wrist broken and bandaged that day in the yard? He's like, you're infected, aren't you, Miss Spindle? Like, just keeps going, right? Why else would Raven protect you so ardently? And your uncle confirmed it. And she realized, like, her uncle admitted it so he can keep his land, his title, and his life. But, that, like, Hoth isn't after his livelihood, but he needed to get to Elspeth. So, like, no, he bartered anything he could with her uncle to get to him. Hoth just, like, wants to get to Raven, too. So, it's like, she's basically the bait to get to Raven because he's been like missing a lot and is like, and so in her mind, Elspeth like cries for help to the nightmare and it's like, it can't end like this. And the nightmare responds back like, I don't know what will happen, Elspeth. Your degeneration is almost at an end. And Elspeth is like, I'm just asking for your help. I understand the price.
Mm-hmm.
And then darkness just takes over. The nightmare just kind of coaches her through like, focus. Orith, the head of the physicians, comes through.
Mm-hmm.
The guy with the claw hand.
The-
Yeah. And he just says, a pleasure to meet you, to finally meet you, Miss Spindle. Elspeth is like freaking out. Like, they'll be back from patrol. We're almost out of time, like in her head, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, it's all ruined. Even if Raven doesn't admit to stealing the cards or being a highwayman, they'll know he hid my infection.
Mm-hmm.
The nightmare's like, Raven need not die. Do you trust me, Elspeth? And Elspeth's like, do I have a choice? Like, do I?
Like, regardless, you're up in there already. Like, what am I supposed to do?
And the nightmare's like, my darling, you've always had a choice. She's like trying to like, not have Raven come up there, but like, how do you tell him like not to come, right?
Like, don't stop. No, please.
Right? The nightmare takes over Elspeth and she like launches to Hoth, like basically punches him in the chin and like kind of like struggles with Hoth and Orith, fighting them off. And Hoth is like, she didn't have like her uncle said she didn't have magic. And the physician's like, well, what is, right? Like she has to have something.
Yeah.
Like, how is she fighting us? Like, what is going on?
What is happening? Yeah.
Like, she was going to like reach for the door after like fighting them off. But before she could open it, like she says saltwater filled her eyes and nose. And she coughed and stunned her. And Raven's voice, I'm like, Raven, like those 2 seconds like cost her.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, sir.
And Raven's voice is like in her head and is like, Elspeth, are you there? And she was dazed off for a moment, but that moment was like all Orith needed to like wrap his claw around her neck. Like Hoth like bangs her head against like the door and everything just goes black. They're like kind of like, shit, like you cracked her head. Hoth's like, she'll live. But then he's like, uh-oh, Spindle. And Raven's in her head like, Elspeth, can you hear me? She's like drifting off and like far away, just tells Raven like, don't come for me. Like Hoth and Orith, they know what I am. They're waiting for you. The nightmare just replies, they'll see you, hang you. You cannot save her. Elspeth kind of reassures him like, you can still find the Twin Alders, Raven. Like you can still save Emery, but not with Hoth and Orith hunting you. The nightmare's like yelling at Elspeth like, get up. She's like, I can't, but you can. The nightmare just says like, let me help you. And she just like sinks into the darkness. The last thing she says, like she saw before she opened her eyes, was a small girl, timid as she peered into a looking glass. Her black eyes glazed with fear. And she whispered, do you have a name? It said, they called me a king's name once, but that was a long time ago. And so she replied, what shall I call you then? And it said, nothing, child. I'm just the wind in the trees, the shadow and fright, the echo in the leaves, the nightmare in the night. And so she wakes up, but her eyes are yellow, like cat-eyed yellow. And the language changes too. So like now instead of talking about like Elspeth as a she or her, it's we. Yep. So it's like the we is like who she's turned into. Like, so she's basically like the nightmare is like her. So the nightmare ends up, taking over, and Elspeth is still like faintly there in her head, just like saying, this is the end, isn't it? I go now and you remain. And the nightmare is like, it was inevitable. Nothing comes for free. She does get the nightmare to promise to help the U's in all their endeavors, which is very vague, but still reassuring.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, at least she has some sort of verbal agreement from him. Like, I'll help them. Do I trust him? No.
Yeah.
But it's something.
Yep. So now, like, it's repeated again. The girl, the king, and the monster they became. So we know that's Elspeth, the Shepherd King, and then now the nightmare. Yep. She ends up killing Orith, which is kind of like frustrating to like the rebel cause, because they're like, that's the blood we were going to use instead of Emery's,
True.
like, to spill. So they're kind of like, okay, well, but Hoth's still alive. And so Elspeth, the nightmare, Shepherd King. I feel like we always have the one character that's like, has 3 names. It's at the end of the book, but here they are.
Jesse Carter.
Yeah. Was in the first Light Winds too. She had like 5 names. Luca.
Oh my god. It was
Luca Regina or something.
Luca Regina. Oh my gosh, what is her first?
She had like 5 names or 2.
So many.
Elspeth Nightmare Shepherd King just says, I surrender myself to the captain of the Destriers and await inquest by the king. So instead of all of them kind of being arrested for harboring her, she's basically turning herself in. So it ends with like her in the dungeon and the king's coming down to see her. And the king's like, why isn't she shackled? Like, what's happening? And the Destriers are like, she like sends some people to the infirmary. Like, she's kind of dangerous. And the king's like, why do we have her? We can just kill her. And she's just like, you can kill, like, they wake her up and she's like, you can kill me, but I have something you might want. And so she barters with him that she's going to help him find the Twin Alders card, because she's the only one that knows where it is.
Because she was the one, well, he was the one who left it.
Yes, my 4th wing spoiler. So skip this if you don't want to hear it. But it just reminded me of how, like, Xaden turned Venin at the end, and I'm like, Elspeth turned Nightmare at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, come on, why are we doing this happy couple?
Listen, I have so many feelings. I know this is off topic, but I know Empyrean 3 is going to be better than Iron Flame, because she got raked over the coals for Iron Flame, and there's no way she's not going to pivot.
Totally.
However, if the entire 3rd book is us getting nothing of Xaden and Violet, I'm going to be so sad. There better be something else. There better be something else in there.
All right, so let's talk about our songs.
Yes, that was One Dark Window.
That was One Dark Window.
Thanks so much for coming. I chose Demons by Imagine Dragons. I will just read you the reasons. You'll hear it pretty much immediately why I chose this song. But it starts with, when the days are cold and the cards all fold, all the saints we see are all made of gold. When your dreams all fail and the ones we hail are the worst of all and the bloods run stale.
Is that something from the old Book of Alders?
It sounds like it, doesn't it? But specifically, the cards all fold, the saints that we see are made of gold. I just feel like it really encompassed the feeling of the cards that we get, especially in the bloods run stale, because there's so much to do with magic running in the blood and in the veins. But also, kind of like the pre-chorus here, for me, this is in Elspeth's perspective, but I want to hide the truth, I want to shelter you, but with the beast inside, there's nowhere we can hide. Like, again, it's a little on the nose, but I mean, like, how could I not? There's a literal beast inside of her. And no matter what we breed, we still are made of greed. This is my kingdom come. And I think that kind of comes back down to, like, no matter what line they're in, they're made of greed, because everyone in some way is attempting to seek out these cards for their own personal benefit or gain. Even if their overarching thing would be to help release magic or, like, give dividends and make amends to the spirit, it's definitely like there's that undertone of greed that's driving them, like that personal effect. And the chorus, when you feel my heat, look into my eyes, it's where my demons hide. Don't get too close, it's dark inside, it's where my demons hide. So quite literally, her eyes turn yellow and she has a nightmare in her eyes, in her head.
Yeah.
At the curtain's call, it's the last of all. When the lights fade out, all the sinners crawl. So they dug your grave, and the masquerade will come calling out at the mess you've made. Just kind of the final atonement of the nightmare taking over Elspeth and giving herself up, giving her over. There's a lot of, like, don't want to hide the truth, but at the end, they say it's what you make. I say it's up to fate. It's woven in my soul. I need to let you go. Your eyes, they shine so bright. I want to save that light, but I can't escape this now unless you show me how. So I just feel like it's Elspeth's like last cry, basically, to like, I have no control over this. I need you to show me. I need you to help me through. And yeah, I just felt like it was very much on brand for the book. And I can't pick anything other than like the quintessential line of, when you feel my heat look into my eyes, it's where my demons hide. Like, it literally, they hide in there.
Yeah.
So that's why I ended up choosing demons.
No, I think that's a great choice. Like, thinking of the song itself, I was like, oh, I'd never pick it. But looking at the lyrics, it makes so much sense.
Yes. It wasn't the vibe. It was definitely the word.
Cool. Well, I picked Control by Halsey.
Mm-hmm.
If you have not listened to the song, go listen to it. Top tier. It's so good. So, like, it started, like, right away, just, like, they sent me away to find them a fortune. And I just, like, this song is definitely from Elspeth's perspective. Like, this is straight Elspeth. Like, she was sent away right from her family.
Mm-hmm.
A few lines down, it's like, the house was awake with shadows and monsters. The hallways, they echoed and groaned. I sat alone in the bed till morning. I'm crying. They're coming for me. So, just, like, this nightmare that, like, she was able to, like, absorb.
Mm-hmm.
And the next line is, I tried to hold these secrets inside of me. My mind's like a deadly disease. So just, like, the more I feel like she held on to the nightmare, like, the more it kind of took over.
Yeah.
And then the way, like, this next part is, like, said in this song, like, it reminds me of just, like, almost an affirmation that Elspeth would, like, tell to herself. So
Totally.
It's like, I'm bigger than my body. I'm colder than this home. I'm meaner than my demons. I'm bigger than these bones. Just, like, kind of, like, reassuring her.
Yeah.
But, like, the chorus, like, the reoccurring chorus is, I can't help this awful energy. Goddamn right you should be scared of me. Who is in control? And so the song is called Control, and, like, who is in control is, like, a big theme.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of reminded me of, like, Elspeth versus the nightmare. Like, who is in control with these two, right? Like, I feel like it was a very back and forth.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stand the person inside me. I turned all the mirrors around. Because, like, every time she looked in the mirror, like, she would, like, have that flash. Is, like, a line that kind of stuck with me about, like, the nightmare in her head. Like, I'm well acquainted with the villains that live in my head. They beg me to write them so they'll never die when I'm dead. So just, like, how the Shepherd King is just there in her head,
Yeah.
Just, like, the same way it ends, right? I can't help this awful energy. Goddamn right, you should be scared of me. Who is in control? So just, like, end with that, like, who is in control of Elspeth? Like, who is there? So.
No, it's such a good one. I don't know if I've heard it, so I will definitely be listening.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
The whole really Badlands album by Halsey is fantastic.
Yeah. I love that. All right. So, are we ready to talk about book ratings?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, for those that don't know, we have our own unique rating system here where we rate in to the moon and to Saturn because we rate on vibes and it is what it is. That's us. So, I rate in moons, Hannah rates in Saturns, and yeah, I think for me, I've been sitting on this book for a hot minute now, and I think it would have been lower had the second half of the book not redeemed itself entirely. Like, I was very enthralled with the last half. So I ended up going with 4 moons because I was really captured by the end. Otherwise, it probably would have been like a 3.5 if it was paced out like the front half of the book was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm actually doing 4 Saturns as well.
Ooh.
Because that last half, like,
yeah.
I texted Britt and I was like, I think I have like 2 hours left of this book. I'm not going to finish tonight. And then 2 hours later, I was like, I finished it.
I was like,
so, like,
oh my God, amazing.
No, I just really enjoyed it. I mean, I love the fantasy genre and, this was just a fun read. I read it right on, like, after reading Crescent City, though. So it was kind of, like, hard to jump from, like, one world to another.
Yeah.
But I think once I got into it, I was really sold. So I'm excited for this next book.
Me too. We're doing something. We have not touched this genre yet on the podcast.
We have not.
So
We are going to go sci-fi.
yes, we are. I'm excited.
I'm excited. So we are going to be reading Recursion by Blake Crouch. So a little bit different, exciting. It reminds me of, reading like 1984 and Ready Player One and
those kind of worlds.
all those like back in high school.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. I'm excited to dive in.
I'm interested too because I know nothing about it.
Nope.
I was like, it has good reviews and it looks great. People like it, so let's just read it.
Yeah. So go on this journey with us. Pick it up.
Yeah.
Let's go on a
Grab the book.
sci-fi journey.
That'll be great. So super excited for that next book. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey for One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. If you could, please rate and review the podcast. It helps us out so much. So whether you listen on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon, wherever you're listening, it would just help us so much if you would rate and leave a nice little review. We would very much appreciate it.
Yes. And don't forget to follow us on social media, Instagram, TikTok. Join our Discord, and we also have a Patreon.
Yes, we do.
So give us your thoughts in the Discord server and on social media. We have a few slots left to fill in our books for this season. So we'd love to hear what you're reading, what you've loved, what you'd like us to talk about. And then also with our Patreon, just please support us. It's as low as one coffee a month.
Yes.
But
It's like
you
an
get
ASP
exclusive content. You get to support. What?
I was just saying it's like an ASPCA ad where we're like going to play In the Arms of the Angel in the background and like slowly
Right?
extra money.
Hey, Dexter, Walter, come here. Support my dogs. They need a better life. Just kidding. They have a great life. But no, we definitely would love if you support us for that. If you have the time and money, we appreciate it because we love doing this for you and we want to provide extra for you as well with our exclusive content and our fun. We have some fun things planned for our Patreon. So especially if you like our episodes where we kind of just talk off the rails and talk about some fun things.
Totally.
It's the best there. But we will see you guys soon.
Yeah. So we'll catch you guys on Wednesday, April 10th with our review of Recursion by Blake Crouch.
And just remember, keep reading with kindness.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.